Hi, everybody, and welcome to our big time boxing show. On this edition of the show, a very special guest, Keith Idec, is going to be joining us. He is one of the best boxing writers going today and does a great job in chronicling the sport. Now, a little bit of news that has just been reported, and that is that March 1st will be the next edition of the Big Time Boxing USA series on DAZN that Salida Promotions puts on. I will be ringside, beginning, interestingly, my 45th year of boxing as a broadcaster, along with Corey Erdman and Raul Marquez. And I'm really excited to be back at ringside for what should be a really good match between Subriel Matias and Gabriel Valenzuela. That is a IBF title eliminator at 140 pounds. Matias, of course, a former champion, and Valenzuela, an excellent fighter, and they're going to battle it out to see who will be the mandatory for Richardson Hitchens, who has the IBF title in a division, 140-pound division, that, as many of you know, I think is the very best in the sport of boxing in terms of depth. Just more good fighters overall in that division as you go down the ranks than perhaps any others. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm very excited to get back to ringside to call those fights. As I said, it's my 45th year of announcing boxing. I feel just as energized and just as excited about it as I did the very first year in 1980 on ESPN. I still prepare exactly the same way, still do the same level of preparation, because my goal is always to bring you what you deserve in terms of ringside commentary that offers some insight and anecdotal information and other facts that you may or may not have at your disposal, and do that without getting in the way of the fight. That's the goal always for me, and it remains the goal all these years later as I continue to do boxing. Well, this show provides me with a chance to chat with great people in the sport of boxing, and we're just about to do that with Keith Idec. Keith was a newspaper man for many, many years, working in New Jersey, and then really moved to the digital side of boxing as the sport of boxing started to become more digital in terms of the way fans got their information. And he is now writing for two very, very good organizations, Ring Magazine, which I do a column for in their print and digital edition. He does stories for their website. He also writes for Uncrowned, the Yahoo Sports platform that Ariel Helwani founded. And so you can see Keith's work on both of those platforms, and he is a terrific boxing writer. And this conversation, as you'll hear, was an interesting one because we not only talked a lot about boxing, we talked about the art and science of coverage of boxing and how it has evolved into where it is now. And Keith has some very, very intriguing insights on that. So let's take a look at the interview I did with Keith Idec. Keith, it's a delight to get to visit with you to talk about your boxing writing endeavors and, of course, about the boxing scene, which is tremendously active and at the moment looks pretty successful from the standpoint of the actual product that boxing is putting out. Let's go backwards in time and talk a little bit about this past weekend. You were here in Las Vegas to cover the fight between the two Davids, Benavidez and Morrell, in what turned out to be a thoroughly exciting evening, not just with that fight, but another one as well. That seemed like an event that brought in February in a very successful way.
It did, Alan. Aesthetically, I don't think we could ask for more than Angel Fierro and Isaac Cruz gave us. It was an incredible fight. And we all kind of knew going into it, Angel Fierro had said he wanted to make it the next Barrera Morales. And of course, that's the highest bar you possibly could set. And I wouldn't say it was Barrera Morales from a skill level necessarily, but from an action standpoint and from an entertainment standpoint, I think we all were thoroughly impressed and really are appreciative of what they gave us. The Fulton Figueroa fight did not quite turn out. I know you've called the first Fulton Figueroa fight.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were expecting more from the fight. I think it was more a reflection of what Figueroa did in the fight than what Fulton did, but it was a little bit
Hmm.
disappointing. Then the main event was high level stuff. Morrell made his way to the final bell. He gave David Benavidez the toughest fight of his career, according to David Benavidez. He's told people that in confidence and quiet anyway. He's told people that was the toughest fight of his career, and he hasn't been as hit as hard as he was by David Morrell, who obviously, from an experience standpoint, Al, as you well know, and he said so after the fight, he's got something to learn. He's got a learning curve here. He's got to catch up to someone as experienced as David Benavidez. But I would favor David Morrell, and I'm wondering what your opinion of it is too, Al. I would favor David Morrell over light heavyweights not named Beterbiev, Bivol, and Benavidez.
I think that's a true statement. Based on the way he fought in that fight, which, as we said, as you pointed out, was his coming out party against really good opposition. It's hard to not say that because the light heavyweight division, like the 168-pound division, isn't the absolute deepest in the world. It's got some phenomenal fighters at the top, and there are good fighters in that division. And you're right, the way Morrell fought, you would assume that he would be heading into fight against anyone as a favorite. One of the interesting things I thought about that fight is we saw David Benavidez again go a full 12 rounds, which he's done recently several times against the really good opposition he's facing now. He is not known as a singular one-punch knockout artist. I have always said that it feels to me like this is the kind of David Benavidez we're always going to see against the highest level opposition. Someone that gives you the full 12 rounds, might not score a knockout, but in many cases, as in this instance, will start to really dominate a fight as it goes on and give you a brilliant performance.
He really did toward the back end of the fight, especially Al. In the later rounds, he took control of the fight. But I was impressed by how Morrell hung in there
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Benavidez is, like you said, he's not a one-punch puncher, not knockout
Hmm.
artist necessarily, but he can crack, and he's a big guy,
Hmm.
and the pressure is just relentless, and it wears you out not only physically but mentally. And Benavidez is a tricky fighter in the sense that he might not look like he's doing the craftiest things, but he really is from a defensive standpoint. Uses his gloves really well, picks off a lot of punches, knows how to not get hit clean, and he was careful
Yeah.
about that on Saturday night because Morrell can punch as well.
That's a really valid point, and it's one that sometimes is a nuanced point that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle among people that don't know the sport as well as you do. That Benavidez does have those defensive skills, and that was on display in this fight because Morrell threw some wonderful combinations. They just didn't all get there. So looking forward on as we do with fighters after a big win, you have David Benavidez now in an interesting position. Morrell as well, and we'll talk about him in a second. But David Benavidez now uh, in the light heavyweight division has shown us he can be a good light heavyweight, beat a former champion before who fought very well in that fight, and now he's beaten Morrell, and now he's sitting here saying, okay, I'm ready for the winner of the February 22nd fight between Beterbiev and Bivol. Now, the questions, I guess, surrounding his future are, number one, whether we think he can get the winner of that fight, and in fact, whether there would be a trilogy which would force him to wait longer, or is there something else David Benavidez can do in the interim?
I think it depends, of course, on what happens February 22nd, Al, because if Bivol wins the fight, they would, I would assume,
Yeah.
fight the third time. So, and we would want to see that because that would mean Bivol raised his level
Sure.
from the standard that he set in the first fight. I don't know that he's going to sell out enough to be able to do that because he's really going to have to do that because he's going to have to be more aggressive. He was aggressive in spots in the first fight, I thought, but he'd have to be more aggressive and take more risks to be able to beat Beterbiev in this rematch. But let's say Beterbiev wins, then the answer to your question is unequivocally yes, because the Saudis, primarily Turki Al-Sheikh, wants that fight next. David Benavidez is going to the fight. I confirmed that today. He is going to be ringside for the fight. And David sees the opportunity of a lifetime for him because while he couldn't get Canelo, and Canelo frankly avoided him, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
Uh, but Artur Beterbiev is not going to avoid him. So he knows he's a young gun. He's 12 years younger, and he's a beast himself. But I think Beterbiev, as the younger guys are prone to say, Al wants that smoke. So I think we'll see that fight um, if he wins on February 22nd, because the Saudis have the financial wherewithal to make it happen. We would like to see it in the U.S. and right there in Las Vegas, or maybe even
Yeah,
Canada. Because why not reward Beterbiev where he's a draw, either in
it's a
Quebec
very
City
good
or
point.
Montreal? You know?
That's that's a really, really good point. That would be. Can you imagine how monstrous that fight would be there? Oh my gosh, it would be
Yeah.
a huge event to be sure. You there's a lot wrapped up in your answer to that question, and one of the interesting things is we're now at a point here where we can realistically say to ourselves, because of the infusion of the resources of the Riyadh seasoned people, that it's not a pipe dream if Beterbiev wins against Bivol. And of course, as you pointed out, the first fight was razor thin. We don't know what's going to happen. But if he does, and there is no trilogy, we're in a position now where we can rightfully, without thinking it's a pipe dream, assume that might happen next. I would assume it's in Beterbiev's best interest to make that happen. He's almost 40 years old.
Yeah, he turned 40 a couple of weeks ago, actually, and Al,
Oh,
he
okay.
doesn't have much time to play around here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's beyond his physical prime. He still somehow only has 21 fights on his professional record, despite that he's been a pro
Amazing.
for 11 plus years.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, and he turned pro late, of course, after that run at the
Yeah.
2012 Olympics, and so he started later, but he wants to, like every fighter, wants to take care of his family as best he can, and this would be the best way to do it. So he wants to remain active. He's fighting Bivol just 3 months after, or was it
Yeah.
4 months? I guess it was October, November, well, whatever it is, 3 or 4 months after.
Yeah.
It's the greatest rate of activity that he's ever had, because he's always hurt, or he's had promotional problems with Yvonne Michelle. There's been a lot of factors that have kept him inactive, but he wants to fight. So, let them go take their rests after they're almost on the same schedule here. They're only 3 weeks apart. So
Right.
they have the financial wherewithal to make it happen. They're on the same schedule. Why wouldn't the fight happen, right?
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so February is, I alluded to it, that February seems to be a month in which boxing could have some astonishing results in the ring. We already saw it on Saturday with the great fight between Fierro and Cruz, and the excellent fight uh, with Benavidez taking on Morel. And now we fast forward to the middle of February, where um, we have Arnold Barbosa in an important fight taking on Jack Catterall, a fight that I think is really good in a division that I'm like very partial to, the 140-pound division. People always used to joke with me about the cruiserweight division back in the day, that I loved it so much. I always seem to have a favorite division, and 140 seems to be it right now. And that fight, one of many, many great 140-pound fights that could be made and will be made, it is a really interesting matchup, isn't it?
It is. And Catterall, I think, has shown himself to be, they use the word operator over there, right? So
No,
he's an elite
right.
level operator over in the UK, and he really is. He's a tricky fighter. He's got more pop than people realize. Probably, certainly, Regis
Hmm.
Prograis would tell us that after fighting him. And you could argue that he beat Josh Taylor twice. So this guy
Yeah,
is a top level fighter, and I hope he's being paid accordingly. And this is not an easy fight either, because Barboza has shown himself to be better maybe than people once thought. Um,
correct.
but he's going over there, and he's taking a risk in doing that. That's a good fight. That's probably under the radar, I would say.
Yeah, that one's going to be in February, in the mid-February, and it's going to be on the Zone. People can see that. And then we move forward to the February 22nd card. So one of the great boxing parlor games is trying to figure out whether the February 22nd card could be rightfully called the greatest overall card of all time. Everybody speaks in hyperbole these days, and so
Yeah.
we put monikers on things. In my opinion, you can certainly go there if you want, because if somebody wanted to make that case, because on that card there are 7 fights that are all fights that would be headlining some card somewhere. We talked about the Bivol Beterbiev fight, of course, Daniel Dubois defending his version of the heavyweight title against Joseph Parker in a terrific fight. Shakur Stevenson taking on Floyd Schofield. Maybe the only fight on that card that we have a super clear-cut favorite. Stevenson, the big favorite. A middleweight fight that's delicious. Carlos Adames, Hamza Shiraz, Virgil Ortiz against Israel Madrimov, Zhou Zhang against Ajit Kabayel, and Buatsi against Smith in a light heavyweight matchup. As I'm reading through those, and every time I do this, it strikes me even more that this is an extraordinary card of boxing.
And the biggest thing from a U.S. perspective, Al, you're 1,000% right about that. It is $26. So again,
very good point.
The company, the Riyadh season, Turkey Al Sheikh, whatever you want to frame it, they have the financial wherewithal to change the economic model in boxing, and that's among the things that they're trying to do, because they feel like, now obviously I am employed by Turkey in some capacity because I work for the ring, so people are going to say, "Oh, you're just propaganda." Stop. Just listen to what I'm saying, please.
Yeah.
We've never been in an environment where you can get this type of quality for $26. And I have heard people say, "Oh, well, it's boxing fans are the most insufferable group of people I've ever come across in my life, Al, and you well know this, having been in the prominent position for a long time."
Yeah.
They're now complaining that it's too much. You're giving me too much good boxing for $26.
Yeah.
It starts too early. 7 fights is too many. You should just give us 5.
Yeah.
I would just implore people who are saying those types of ridiculous things to just be quiet, because you can't complain when you're not getting enough, and then when you're getting too much. What's too much? What is too much? Why don't you just, if you can't be by the television at whichever time this starts on February 22nd, well, then just catch up or watch it later. We all have more important things to do at some point in our lives than watch boxing all day. I understand that. So if you need to be with your children or your wife or whatever it is that interests you beyond boxing, okay, but don't complain, because you sound silly. You sound silly because this is not required. You're not required to do this. You're not. You and I, fortunately, we're being paid to do this, which is, I'm very thankful for, and I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah.
Most people are not being paid; they're paying to watch it. So just enjoy it. Can you? I guess my message to boxing fans would be out, and I didn't mean to get on a soapbox related to boxing.
That's okay.
But can you just enjoy something for a change, for God's sake? I mean, because it's just, you're always complaining about something. Jeez, man, like I complain. I'm an old crankpot now. I complain about a lot of stuff too. But I mean, man, it's 7.
We lost your audio there for a second, Keith. Maybe you touched something. Are you back now? All right,
I was getting a call coming in.
Oh, okay. Your point's well taken. You know, I just wrote We Are Compatriots. You write of course, for the Ring website, and I write a column for the Ring magazine. And in my column, this one that just came out in February, I wrote in parentheses when I was talking about something, boxing fans tend to be glass half empty folks, and that. Which speaks to your point. You know, sometimes accepting that things are okay is hard to do. You're right about the price point. Of course, it's much better than we've seen with pay-per-views. And because, you know, some of these have to be pay-per-views, if you're going to deliver them as pay-per-views, which the economic culture kind of mandates, then the idea of lowering the price point, I think, is a great way to get it done. And you're right about people watching when they want, and that's the beauty of now. I mean, I had to go do something to take care of my wife the other night when the pay-per-view was happening, but I didn't care because I came back and I rewound and there it was, you know, in front of me.
Right.
So that, I mean, the thing about that card that is intriguing to me is that we see all these mouth-watering fights, and I want to just dig into one or two of them briefly. Daniel Dubois and Joseph Parker, in my opinion, is a fascinating fight because Joseph Parker has shown us the ability to fight with any heavyweight in the world. He hasn't beaten all of them. He's beaten some of the top heavyweights, and he's always acquitted himself very well. He's still in his early 30s, which is almost incomprehensible when we think of how long he's been on the scene.
Yeah.
And he represents a true challenge, does he not, to Daniel Dubois?
He does, and I think it's really admirable of Joseph Parker that or impressive, I should say, that he rebuilt himself the way that he did. Because when he got
Correct.
knocked out by Joe Joyce, I said, well, that's a wrap probably for Joseph Parker. This is going to be where he enters the territory of
Yeah.
gatekeeper or whatever. And he didn't. He came back and won some big fights. I mean, he beat Deontay Wilder. Look what he's done. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And as you said, it's probably deceiving because he won the WBO heavyweight title at such a young age that people
Yeah.
think he's older than he is. So yeah, I mean, and Dubois too. Dubois has rehabilitated his reputation and won some. The Joshua fight, of course, was remarkable for him. But it's interesting too that I think they both looked like they were at one point decimated by Joe Joyce, and now they're here fighting each other. And
Fascinating.
where's Joe Joyce? No offense to Joe. I mean, Joe's a nice guy. I
Yeah.
don't mean it that way, but
That's really interesting, and you made the point. Joe Parker keeps inventing himself by getting these important wins against Zhang and against Wilder and all the other people, and of course Dubois now in a prime position should he win this fight. And again, we have to give him credit for taking this fight, for not getting a bronchial situation and pulling out, which we've seen from others, mentioning no names. But the interesting thing is he's going through with this fight, and he's got a lot to lose because he is on the fast track to fight Alexander Usyk.
yeah, no, a ton to lose. Absolutely, no. There's a lot at stake, and he obviously wants that to happen again. He fought him. He fought him once. And maybe I don't know what you think about it, Al. I watched it in on replays numerous times, whether it was a low blow or
Yeah.
I don't know. And I thought Usyk has obviously had some problems dealing with body punches as an amateur
Hmm.
and then a pro also. I thought he was trying to sell it a little bit myself, but I'm not the one who got hit, but you could argue that Dubois should have left the ring with all the titles that day, and then unfortunately for Dubois, and a credit to Usyk, Usyk came back and has the mental
Yeah.
fortitude to put himself back where he belonged. And there are people who think that Dubois kind of quit again in that fight. It's a word that we don't like to use, but people think he kind of just shut it down mentally and realized he was in over his head against a generational great and kind of tapped out in a way. I don't know if that's true, but that would mark 2 times that he did that.
And then he reinvented himself with two
Right.
monster victories,
Yeah.
both fights in which he was, I think, at least a slight betting underdog. A lot of people thought Hrgovic was going to beat him, and Joshua went into that fight probably thought of as the favorite. And Daniel Dubois gets it done. And he is the youngest of all the heavyweights, not all of them, but of the major heavyweights out there for the most part. He's the youngest. And on that, one last thing about that February 22nd card, though we could talk about that for hours. The Adames Shiraz fight is a fascinating one because it's two middleweights. In Adames's case, we haven't, for whatever reason, it has been difficult to get him in with some other top middleweights, and Shiraz has shown us in his recent fights, he's right there, and this is a coming out party for him, which in some ways it is for Adames as well, even though he has won a title.
I think the fight in a nutshell to me, Al, is which Carlos Adames shows up. Is it the
Very
Carlos
good.
Adames who fought Patrick Teixeira and lost? Or is it the Carlos Adames who I know you were sitting 5 feet away from it happening, dismantled Montiel? Which one?
Yeah.
And that I think will determine how the fight goes because we've already seen Shiraz in a fight against a southpaw who's not nearly as good as Carlos Adames, in Ammo Williams, he rocked him in the third round of that fight. And if he
Yeah.
were more experienced or maybe more aggressive after that happened, maybe he would have knocked him out. And then Shiraz's credit, he comes back and wins the fight in impressive fashion. But Carlos Adames, make no mistake, is not Ammo Williams. And if the right Carlos Adames shows up, he will not only win this fight by knockout, he will make himself a lot of money moving forward.
Yeah, the Adames that you talk about, that some people look at and say, "Wow, he's got." And I did announce some of his fights. I did his fight with Derevyanchenko, which was a very close fight,
Yeah.
and Derevyanchenko does that. Of course, he's always in fights with people, and he
Mm-hmm.
always makes it difficult, even the ones he doesn't win. But the untapped, it seems, potential for Adames seems vast, and this is certainly the stage on which he could show that. So we talk, February obviously going to be a great month. There are several other matches that are good, and the product of boxing is certainly good. The way boxing is both delivered and covered has changed and continues to evolve. You are one of the writers in boxing that I think, your ascendance as a terrific boxing writer has been digital. You have
Yeah.
been on the digital side of covering boxing and done it with great aplomb at a number of different places. And of course, now, as we said at the beginning, and you're pointing out, you work with Ring Magazine plus Uncrowned, the Yahoo Sports platform that Ariel has, which is terrific. And boxing fans now are used to getting their information from that source. It's been an interesting journey to see how the fight game kind of became a digital entity.
Very much so, Al. And I come from a newspaper background, and I
Yeah,
spent 23 years at the Bergen Record and Herald
yeah. I
News in
didn't
New
want
Jersey.
to diminish your newspaper
No, yeah,
background. But more boxing fans know you from the digital end of
no,
things.
no. My point. No, I didn't take it as a
Yeah.
as a slight. Al, I'm just saying that I come from a traditional journalism background.
Yes.
So, like
Right.
last week when Michael Katz passed away, that's the era that I came up in
Yes.
learning journalism and boxing journalism more specifically, where I had all these maniacs surrounding me, kind of like, and I mean that I mean that in a fun way. I mean, I was
Yeah.
a young kid.
Absolutely.
I was a young kid with a full head of hair and my whole life ahead of me, and I'm watching Michael Katz tap people. And when I say tap people with his cane, sometimes it's a little harder than a tap. But I
Yeah.
but I had a front row seat to the whole show, Al, and
Yeah.
I learned. I kept my eyes open, my ears open, and my mouth shut because I had no experience and I was just trying to learn the business. And I learned from guys like Borges and Michael Katz. And Michael Katz was a brilliant writer, obviously,
Very good writer.
at his faults. But he treated me very well. I got along great with him. And same goes for Borges and all the rest of the guys. But my point overall is when you learn journalism in the
Yeah.
sense in the way that I learned it, when I started at the paper in 1993, the internet didn't exist, so I had
Right.
no. And I didn't know that boxing was going to become my specialty. I covered the NFL and I covered
Right.
basketball and baseball and all kinds of sports and I kind of fell into it in a way. I was a huge boxing fan when I was a kid, and kind of fell into it as a professional. But so I guess what I'm saying is like I didn't foresee this happening, and it's a 24/7. If you're doing it at the level that we think that we're doing it, or we feel that we're obligated to do it based on how we're paid and all, it's a 24/7 job.
Yeah.
Like you're getting phone calls at all times of the day. You live in different time zones and sometimes you might spend a half an hour on the phone with somebody and it's just kind of BSing because you're friendly with them and that kind of thing. But it's very time consuming and you're always trying to relay information. But the thing that I would stress to young people coming up in this business, because sooner or later people like me are going to be retired or moving on to something else or whatever. There's this race in digital journalism to
Yeah.
get the story first.
Right.
There's not enough focus on getting the story right. And
Correct.
what I would urge people, and not I know you're well aware of this, Al, but what I would urge people to do is keep yourself a little list, find out who got it right, not who
Mm-hmm.
always got it first.
That's right.
First and right is a great combination, but there's first doesn't matter if you don't get it right. And there are people too often that get half of the story right and they either leave out a significant part of the story or they get 9 facts wrong. That's not journalism. It's
No.
bad journalism. It's not the way to do it. And I don't want to sound like I'm some holier than thou, whatever. But if you take this seriously and you do it the way that it's supposed to be done, you will not get stuff wrong with any regularity.
That is what you just, that soundbite of everything that you just said, I would add a giant amen to. And because you have the underpinnings of the journalistic background of the newspaper work, it allows you to think that way. Now, there are many younger writers who came up through the digital ranks who have a similar mindset. There are some that don't. And what it does is, as you point out, it makes this mad rush to be the first person to put something out important. I remember doing I was doing my daily sports talk radio show on the ESPN affiliate out here in Las Vegas in the early 2000s, and at that point with the internet, it had started where you'd see something come in. You know, my show I think was on at 2:00. You'd see something come in on the internet. You'd see it at 11:00 or 12:00, and I would hear people rush to talk about it on the air, and I would always think to myself, okay, this has not been corroborated. We don't know if that's true yet. And by the time I was on at 2:00, it had already been debunked. And I was always careful not to talk about those things just because, and some of them were on ESPN or other where they attributed to unknown sources, and they weren't yet, verified. So it speaks to your point that trying to be accurate is much more important than trying to be quick. And you are your work now with Uncrowned and also with Ring Magazine, as you rightly point out, is a 24-hour endeavor to a great extent because you're not waiting for a deadline to put a newspaper out. You're not even waiting that you have to get on a TV show at 6:00 or 5:00 or 4:00 to put the information out. You have to not only find out about it, but make that extra 2 or 3 phone calls to figure out what it is.
Yeah, and Al, in covering this business the way that you have, sometimes people will relay half of the story to you and not intentionally. They just don't know the rest of the story. And so you got to
Yeah, that's right.
make extra phone calls. And as you said, corroborate the information because you don't want to be wrong. And don't get me wrong, there have been instances where you thought you were 1,000% right, and then there was something that was a little off.
Yeah.
People are going to make mistakes on occasion, but I'm just saying the people who make mistakes, like this is not baseball. If you're batting 350, you should be out of a job, right? But we got people who are batting like 600, which would be amazing. It'd never been done in the history of baseball. You were even close to that. If you're batting 60 and doing 600 and doing what we do, you shouldn't have a job either.
Dave Bontempo, Dave, of course, who was a wonderful sports writer and a broadcaster. I worked with him for many years. Very great guy. And he used to joke because he used to say, he said, I subscribe to the 333 rule. He said, because in baseball, if you hit 333, 1 out of every 3 things, you're a star. He said, so I keep trying to convince my wife, I'm good 1 out of 3 times. That makes me a star in baseball. Don't criticize me. So, you're espousing the Dave Bontempo rule. Keith, you are. I mentioned, that you're working on Uncrowned, plus you're working with Ring Magazine with their website, and the Ring brand has been invigorated by its purchase by Turki Al-Sheikh and all the resources that have put into it. I was looking at I hadn't seen the February issue, and I sent in my column, but I hadn't seen the magazine. And I was looking at it, and it's a very handsome looking publication and all the rest of it. What does it mean for Ring to be kind of on the upswing? It's a traditional and iconic name in boxing. Does it feel like that's a good thing overall?
Yeah, there's obviously brand recognition there, and I work for Boxing Scene, and we work for the same company, of course, Paramount Global for quite some time. But we were able to establish Boxing Scene as quite a brand as well, and we're proud of what we did there. But we did not have a 100-year institution behind us. I mean,
Exactly.
that's, it's had its issues over the course of the years, but
Yeah.
people know the they think of Bert and a lot of other people who
Sure.
did amazing work for a long time. People that, when you look at movies on TV and you see like all these old these sports writers with their fedoras and their cigars and all kinds of, I mean, that's writing about boxing when boxing was much more of a mainstream sport and had
Yeah.
much more prominence on the landscape than it does now. I mean, those are the kinds of things you think of when you think of the Ring magazine. There's a scene in The Godfather where there's an issue of the Ring magazine sitting on the table. I mean, that there's not boxing scenes not on the table. I mean, it didn't. There was no internet then, and I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing my
Right.
own place where I used to work. I'm just saying. I mean, it has
No,
that
it's
type of
interesting.
cachet, and it's also a responsibility for people to. And
Yes.
I don't mean other people didn't take it seriously, but it's upholding, the integrity of the magazine. And again, I know it's had its issues over the course of the years, but look, we're trying to get it right every day. We're passionate about it, and we do have the resources, which is extremely helpful. And it's a place where I didn't foresee myself working. If 5 years ago I thought that
Yeah.
boxing scene might be the job that I ride into retirement, but you better have your head on a swivel, and you better be able to make adjustments because you don't
Yes.
know what's coming. You know.
Boy, is that true? Who could have ever foreseen from all of us working in the media and the way this was all going to go? You made an interesting point because you're younger than I am. The group of sports writers, those curmudgeon sports writers that you were around, the Michael Katzes, the Borgeses, and that group. I was younger when there was a different group of curmudgeon sports writers on their way out. Remember Dick Young, the former
Oh, of
sports
course, the
writer?
New York Post. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'll never forget being, it was the early '80s, being a young broadcaster, and I'm, and even just before that, when I was writing boxing for
Mhm.
Boxing Illustrated back in the day
Mhm.
a million years ago, and I knew of this guy, and he was as was Katz and some of these other guys, kind of he was even more of a Damon Runyon character. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget being around them in a press room at Madison Square Garden, and I remember saying to myself, this is a unique little slice of history, as was what you had with those writers, and I of course knew them very well and was around them. I was doing more television, obviously, but I knew of them. It's kind of an interesting rite of passage to know all those journalists and watch the way they operated, and then be the person that accepts the torch from them.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. Mark Kriegel and I are close, and Mark has a fondness and an appreciation and respect for guys like Dick Young and Jimmy Breslin, and he tells me that
Yeah,
type of stuff all the time. He says, "Well, this is the way Jimmy Breslin would have written," and it was I grew up reading the tabloids, and I grew up in New Jersey, so I would
sure,
get the New York tabloids, the Post, and the Daily News all the time, and everything. So I came up reading that type of stuff. But Mark has a real understanding and appreciation of it because he's a little older than me and came up in the New York tabloid. He worked for the Daily News and the New York
sure.
Times and the Post and everything. So, yeah. And when you hear, I just have a fondness for. I don't know if I'm an old soul. I'm just an old person at this point, I guess.
You're not that old.
But, but the point is, I have a respect for history
Yeah,
and those rites of passage, as you said. And look, it doesn't mean people are, didn't have their flaws and all that type of
yeah,
stuff, but we all do.
exactly. Oh, sure.
We all have our flaws, and no one's perfect. And I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
make it like I am. So
Yeah, we look sometimes at the past, and I know people always say, "Oh, you have a gauze cover over the lens that you're looking through." I don't think anybody. I mean, you talk about Michael Katz, who passed away recently. We all know Michael was more than a character, and had his share of confrontations and hostilities. But it doesn't take away from the fact that all kind of added to his folklore. And at the end of the day, it was the really good writing that people remember, and for all of that whole group, which is a fascinating group. But one of the things that I love, and you're a central part of it, and I love interviewing, the different people that are covering sports now. We're just like I would. This is the way I kind of look at what we're going through, or what's happening now. We're we're in an era, in a different world, in the entertainment world, where streaming shows have reached excellence and attained a certain kind of stature that make this a golden era for quote unquote television, or however you want to put it, for those entities. And they're different, right? It's a different world. It's streaming. It's, different. I look at the boxing journalistic endeavors in a similar way. We're kind of going through with writers like you and so many other, Jake Donovan. I could go on and mention many, many other excellent writers who are on the scene today, who are writing well, they're reporting well, and then when it's necessary for them to embroider the situation and write with a little bit more of a flourish and write with more of an eye toward the esoteric, they're able to do that as well. And I don't want people to, I think it's important for people to take this, because it's a 24-hour thing and it's all sitting there, and it doesn't have maybe some of the mystique of what we're talking about. I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that there's some wonderful journalism going on. I don't know if you view it that way, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, and the other thing I do, Al, and the other thing is, like, you have to, and this goes back to Katz, and I think it's worth mentioning Michael as many times as we can on this thing, because he was invaluable to boxing journalism for a long time. But you got to have some balls.
Yeah,
Bottom
that's
line,
true.
like, you gotta,
Right.
like, this business lends itself to people doing all kinds of shady, weird thing,
Yeah,
weird maybe, but shady and deplorable things in some instances, and that's not always the case. There are many good
yeah,
people in this industry who do good things behind the scenes that they don't want publicized. But what I mean by that is this business is dirty. It's dirty, and there are things that people get wrong from the regulatory standpoint and other standpoints, and you
right.
just have to, in the fairest, most professional way, point these things out and let the chips fall where they may. That's what your job is. Like, but people say, "Oh, well, if you write this, someone's going to say blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Look, so if I get fired, I'll find another job." Like, but you're not going to tell. I don't mean it in a flippant way, but because we're encountering this now, where people are saying, so and so is telling so and so what to write. They're not. They're not.
Yeah,
There's certain restrictions we're all going to have, and we were
always.
entangled. Let's Boxing scene was under the same corporate umbrella as Showtime, and so there's just certain realities to that you just will encounter. Like, no one is calling you up and saying you don't do this and don't do no, but you have to understand. Same principle applies to ESPN.com. They try to keep themselves as separate as possible from the ESPN linear product and streaming
Mhm.
product, but the reality is they are in business with Top Rank,
Right.
and there are just certain things that are just going to have to go a certain way, because that's reality. And I would hope that people looking at it from the outside looking in don't think that we're not aware of that. Believe me, we're more aware of that than you will ever be. So don't think you're telling me something on Twitter with your
Yeah,
snide remarks and whatever. You're not informing me of anything. I promise you. I thought about this long and hard,
yeah,
and if you don't like the situation, well, I don't know what to tell you. What I'm trying to do is just try to do the job to the best of my ability,
yeah.
and try to do some things that help people in some ways. And without going into too much detail, when you ascend to a certain position and you're respectful of it and you want to help people, you can, and you should,
I'm
for whatever
shocked to hear
that's
you.
worth.
I'm shocked to hear you say you had a snide comment on Twitter. That's never happened before.
Well, it's mostly snide comments. It usually
It's not
starts
a.
with fat,
I mean,
bald, whatever. It's fine. I know I'm fat and bald. I got a mirror. You're not telling me anything I don't know. You know?
shocking that someone would make
Yeah.
a snide comment. Yeah, no, all of what you said, I think, is very well put. And the thing about it, I think, that's intriguing is that the the way you do it, the way you report on a story, also has something to do with it. All of what you just talked about, pointing out things from a factual standpoint, and buttressing them with either a quote from somebody that was involved or some other fact. Uh, if you report on something in a reportorial way and you're not making it a an editorial diatribe, then you've done your job. And most of the people will, even involved in this situation, will kind of understand it better because the way you reported on it was from a factual viewpoint. Some people just that don't know journalism don't understand that the form you do it in, the who, what, when, where, how, and why, if you do it in the way you're supposed to do it, that's prescribed, you then what you do is you present it in the right way. And so even those people involved that might otherwise be, skittish about it, are not so much. And from the broadcast standpoint, it's so funny, when you're broadcasting boxing and doing boxing, you face that same dilemma from a different viewpoint. And you talked about people telling you what to do. And I never had anyone ever tell me what to say. I mean, I've been at several networks. I've done dozens and hundreds of pay-per-views where you're working for the promoter's actually the one that's paying you. And my theory always was that if I announce this fight the way I think it's appropriate to announce this fight, in which I'm being fair to the fighters, fair to the officials, fair to the people that are in the corners, and offering the fans something that they want to hear, I really can't go wrong, can I? At the end of the day, unless I make it personal or I decide to veer off in some, as I pointed out, I would do some editorial rant that doesn't make sense, people should accept that. Not everyone will, but most will, won't they?
Well, the adults will, Al, and that's the biggest thing.
Right.
And and you put that eloquently, Al. And the other thing that you said, most important, is it's never personal. For some people, I understand when you're writing about someone's career, they will take it personally because how couldn't I understand. But just try to remove yourself from it, and that's not always easy in the emotional aftermath of a fight or something like that.
Yeah.
I promise whoever I'm writing about, it's never personal, and if we can talk about it like gentlemen or maybe not gentlemen, however you want. If you have an issue, it's fine. I mean, we're all adults, and if I ever get something wrong, by all means, you should point it out to me and say, hey,
I agree.
I know you tried to get it right, but you got it wrong. And if I got it wrong, I'll tell you, hey, that's on me. I got it wrong. Because too often in our society, I don't even mean boxing writing, I just mean in general, people never want to own their mistakes. And no one's perfect. So just if you happen to make a mistake, just try not to have it happen with regularity, but own it. It's okay.
I agree.
Well, people don't do that.
This conversation, I could have this conversation with you for 5 hours, which I would not keep you for 5 hours. And this is the kind of overdrinks conversation about the art of journalism that I find fascinating, and I think people get a kick out of it as well. I am so happy that we got to delve into some of that as well as the boxing activity, because I think it's important for fans to understand the viewpoint of those people like you who are presenting the sport to them, and it's been great. I wish you all a continued success, and hopefully we'll get together down the road here, and I'll have you back and we can chat a little bit more about some of the upcoming fights this year.
Al, I very much appreciate the platform and you allowing me to talk about some things that we don't ordinarily talk about on boxing podcasts. So I do appreciate the latitude to do that. And I also, look forward to having a beer with you in Vegas at some point. But more importantly, I got to come see that show. I wasn't able to make it last Thursday, but I will make it at some point.
That's great. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I did my music show leading up to the Benavidez Ralph. You were very busy. I know you were slammed with writing about you're writing for two masters, and you had so much to cover that time. So I totally understand. But we're definitely going to get you out there and have you enjoy that. Keith, thank you very much for visiting with us.
Oh, you're welcome, Al. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Keith Idec. I thought it was fascinating. And we'll have Keith back again to talk about what's going on in the world of boxing as we continue on. We have lots of fun guests lined up for you in the future, including the great Randy Couture, brilliant MMA practitioner and great commentator now as well. Tom Schreiber, the fabled ring announcer. We're also going to have a whole ring announcer group of people on, because we've already had Mark Chinook on, who does the ring announcing for Top Ring. We're gonna have Tom Schreiber, who does the so many of Frank Warren's shows in England, the Queensberry, and also of course the Salida Promotions Big Time Boxing USA cards, and so many other duties he has. And then we're going to bring on, over the next month or so, we will have both Jimmy Lennon Jr. and Michael Buffer joining me. So we're going to cover all the people, the major ring announcers working in the sport today, and I know you'll enjoy hearing from them. We'll see you next time on Big Time Boxing.